Hi, and welcome to episode 2 of this season's Path of Exile University. This is Gearing 101, and PoE University is like a teaching series I do to help new players understand Path of Exile more. We're going to be talking about gear and helping everybody with that. So, there are a bunch of different inventory slots in Path of Exile. We have helmet, body armor, gloves, boots, and then you have primary and or main slot and offhand. You have amulets. You have a left and left and right ring slot. You have a belt. You have flasks where you can put life, mana, or utility flasks or unique flasks. And we do not have pants in Path of Exile. So if that sounds like the kind of game for you, you'll fit right in. Um, but that is like the different gear slots, and there are different kinds of core types of defenses. Like gear can be armor, it can be evasion, it can be energy shield, and it can also be a combination of those. So you could have an armor evasion chest piece, or you could have a armor energy shield chest piece. So let's talk a little bit about armor. It mitigates physical damage from hits, and it does not mitigate physical damage over time. So a more advanced example, there's a scary thing called Corrupting Blood, which is physical damage over time and can easily kill you. And armor would do nothing against this. But armor, while it is slightly complicated and the game doesn't do a very good job of explaining it, it is still very strong. Evasion is a chance to evade damage from specifically attacks, so it doesn't do anything against spells. But whenever a skeleton is firing a bow at you, you might have a chance to negate that damage completely. An energy shield is 1-to-1, the same value. Like if you have 100 life or you have 100 energy shield, they are like exactly the same point for point. However, chaos damage goes through energy shield, so you can't easily just do a energy shield character. And it starts recharging after not taking damage from 2 seconds, and you can make it even faster. And yeah, there's like those are like the 3 different types of like items and gear. And on gear, you can roll resistances, and resistances are very important to Path of Exile. The base resistance cap is 75, so you can get, for example, 75% fire resist. However, you can raise the maximum with other things. The total maximum that you can never go above is currently 90. And that would make you insanely strong. So you can very easily tell that the game is completely designed and expects you to have 75% of each elemental resistance. When completing the campaign, it's very normal to have minus 60 chaos resistance. However, there's not that much chaos damage in the game. That depends a little bit on the league. Like Ritual, for example, the league that we just had 2 rituals that had very heavy chaos damage, where you noticed a huge increase in like, wow, I really need chaos rest to interact with those 2 shrines. And then you also had you have a boss in the maps called Al Hazmin. Like it's more like it's more choice based. Like, I am about to interact with chaos, something dealing chaos damage. I will either grab a potion or craft on some extra chaos resist for doing this. Chaos rest isn't necessarily something you'll encounter all the time, or at least way more infrequently than elemental damage. So, fire resist is damage mitigation for all fire damage, and that includes damage over time. So if you're standing, for example, on burning ground, or if you're taking fire damage from an ignite, which is, yeah, fire damage over time. Cold resistance as well is damage from all cold damage, and same with lightning. And then chaos resist will... chaos resist is also mitigation for all chaos damage, including things like poison. So there's it's very important to have high resistances. Whenever you're able to get even up to like close to 0 chaos resist or 10 or 20, it'll feel really good. I've very easily survived with characters with minus 60. So especially on softcore, don't panic if you have minus 60 on chaos rest. Do panic if you have minus on any elemental rest, or even not 75. You have other defenses as well, and for those that do find defenses very fascinating, do remember we have a like advanced defense lesson from last semester with Nugian, where we go very in depth on all the advanced ones and teach you how to build different defenses. So some basic ones we can talk about now. We have dodge, which it grants a chance to prevent a damaging hit, and just dodge wouldn't work for spells, but there is also spell dodge, and this is very strong. Block is in some ways very similar to dodge. However, like you can completely block an attack in the same way you can completely dodge an attack. However, there are some equipment, for example shields, that will give you, for example, 5% life back when you block, which is very strong. And getting 5% life on block and being block capped, which is 75%, same as dodge cap is 75%, it would make you virtually immortal to like a slew of small monsters, whereas block wouldn't be that strong against like big boss slams. You also have avoidance, so you can, for example, on one of your flasks in Path of Exile, have you could have a Quicksilver, which is a flask that makes you faster. You could have this Quicksilver rolled with immunity to freeze and chill while the flask is online. You can also there's two different ways of getting ailment immune, we call it, on a character. You can have reduced duration of, if you get reduced duration of elemental modifiers to 100%, then the only ones that still affect you are like chilled ground, burning ground, etc. They would still affect you. And if you get a reduced effect to 100%, then you're just, it's basically ailment immune. So that's pretty good. You can get stun avoidance, and you can get stun immunity as well. And you can get stun avoidance, like chance to avoid physical damage. There's not that much damage avoidance in the game, and it's not frequently used as much. Damage reduction, however, is very important. The current strongest source of damage reduction is Fortify and getting a bunch of Fortify effect. It is currently miles better than any form, and a lot of players would either like to see Fortify being nerfed a little bit, or other defense mechanics being buffed slightly to make it more in line with Fortify. But there is a little bit of a power imbalance there. And there's a lot of different damage type examples we have. So you have both melee and ranged attacks. And you can get like ranged dodge as well, or like ranged avoidance specifically. There's targeted spells, there are AoE spells, and you have damage over time skills like poison or ignite would be damage over time. There's area damage, there's fire, cold, and lightning damage for the elemental ones. And we have non-elemental ailments like bleed or poison. And quick rule of thumb, but all poison damage is chaos, but not all chaos damage is poison. So there are like direct hits that are chaos damage as well. And then we have projectiles, we have chaos damage, mines, traps, minions. And minions in particular for scaling is, they're basically only affected by the fact that it says minion damage. Whenever, if you had, for example, a ring that said 20% increased damage, this wouldn't help your minions. So minions are like very specific in scaling. We have totems, we have brands, and we have increased damage. You can get increased spell damage, you can get increased attack damage, and some things. And this is another thing we're going to try to cover later, but it's not very clear in Path of Exile what is local and what is global. We'll get to that later, but that's a bit of a annoying thing in PoE, is that it doesn't explain itself as well, and that's obviously why we have the need for things like PoE University. And then obviously there's loads of like base types like claws, daggers, bows, and there is also damage conversion. So the damage conversion goes that you can do physical to lightning to cold to fire to chaos. Like you can't ever do chaos to physical, you can't ever do chaos to fire, etc. So this is like how the chaos, or sorry, the conversion chain works. So there's a website called PoEDB, and this is very extremely useful for learning about affixes and item level, and it's very used for crafting. I can just bring it up real quick to show you. We'll just bring up let's see. We'll bring up one-handed claws. So if I open up PoE you can see we have all the things at the top here, and I can click on increased flat physical damage, and we can see all the different tiers. And this is a prefix. It's listed here on the left bracket. We have suffixes on the right bracket. And obviously an item in Path of Exile, it can max have 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. And PoE and third-party things are very useful in Path of Exile because, as I said, the game doesn't explain it that much. So every item will have an item level, and you can see here what the required item level for the mod is. And we'll cover that a bit more later too. But turning on advanced tooltips in the UI option is extremely important. I'll show you where that is right now. So if you go to in-game options, user interface, and then scroll down, here you see advanced mod descriptions. And that basically does that when you hold Alt on an item, it'll show you the tier and a little bit more info. So that's very, very important there. And crafting is very complicated in Path of Exile. And when you're new, it could be very beneficial to buy your items. And yeah, items can have 3 types of modifiers. You have the implicit. So for example, a ruby ring, that'll have fire resistance as it is implicit. And a leather belt would have flat life as its implicit, or a chain belt would have energy shield as it is implicit. And whenever I use an alchemy or an essence or anything to change the item and craft on it, which we'll get to later, that will not affect the implicit. There is a corruption orb, which has a chance to either destroy your item or change the implicit to something maybe better. Explicits are the prefixes and suffixes. So these can be like rolled with different types of currency or through things like harvest. And they're also based around item level. So obviously, if you found a sword that is item level 20, that can get a lot less of the good mods than something that is item level 83. With item level 86 being currently the highest in the game, there are no item level 87 to 100 mods. So if you're ever wondering, is there any benefit to having an item level 100 item? Currently, item level 100 is exactly the same as 86. And there are also enchants, which is you get them from lab. There are some currency orbs that will give you enchants as well, but it's something you can get on a glove, a belt, a helmet, or boots. And there are different like types of power. They'll basically the helmets, for example, will increase skills. So maybe you're enjoying fireball and you want 40% increased fireball damage. So here is an example of an item. This has quality, it has an enchant, it has an explicit and implicit. So let's walk through it. So quality, this is something you use at the end game, and it will increase. So this 79 life will be getting a 1.2 multiplier. So you'd have to like stop holding Alt down to see how much it is. But this this would be 94 life because it's getting a 20% increase. And then we have, you can see the item level here is item level 85. It requires level 80 because a vermilion ring is like a very, very good endgame base type. So you actually need your character to be level 80 just to wear it. It has a anoint or an enchant, which is from a endgame league mechanic called Blight. Not super important, but you can see this is the color of the text for enchants. The implicit here, similar to a ruby ring, would here have fire resist. The vermilion ring has life. This is also getting affected by the quality here. And so tags here is very important. You can see life, 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 mana, mana. So you can see a trend here that you can see what is going to affect different things. And obviously this one has it has fist damage, it has life, it has a crafted mod on it. You can see that's the color for crafted mods, similar as enchants. And then you have resist, dexterity, and cold resist. So this is what makes up an item. This is a really, really good item and very, very difficult in Path of Exile to figure out what is a good or bad item. And part of the reason for why these are so complicated is also things like local versus global modifiers. Particularly, and this is a good example because physical damage or percentage physical damage on a weapon is always local, and it can be very, very complicated because there are physical spells. So as a quick example, there is a very popular physical spell called Blade Vortex. And I've seen new players use, for example, things like this for Blade Vortex. 5 to 8 physical damage. Or sometimes it would say 60 or 70% physical damage. Now, as a new player, you might put that on your character and be like, wow, my Blade Vortex spell is going to do more damage. It won't. So yeah, local modifiers are basically for when you're using the item itself. So this one, if you're doing either a default attack or a wand attack, like Kinetic Blast is an attack that basically covers your screen and projectiles, that will get affected with the 5 to 8 physical damage because it's local to the weapon. And this is one of the more complicated things in Path of Exile that is something you actually have to deal with early on. And global modifiers, they don't change the item, but they apply the bonus to the character and the skills and spells you're using, similar to how allocating it on the skill tree would work. Like, for example, if this carved one had 25% global critical strike multiplier, that would be similar to getting global critical strike multiplier on the tree. And yeah, all weapons can be used for attacking, and you can cast spells without a weapon. So it's very important to understand this, and I fully get that this is very overwhelming early. Generally, spell modifiers will have, like, for example, the carved one could also have this as an affix. So the implicit on ones is spell damage. Some ones have cast speed, but this is why it's important to a combination of a little bit of gear knowledge as well as understanding the tags on the gear. But this is probably what they should really work on to make more clear for new players because it's very complicated. So don't feel too bad if you feel a little bit overwhelmed at this point. But at least with spells, it will tell you 1 to 4 fire damage to spells. There are some exceptions to this. With a ring could have it could just say like 1 to 10 fire damage, and that could be global. So this, in my opinion, is very unfortunate with how complicated the local versus global difference is. And it's basically things you have to understand on a case-by-case notice. We'll try to do as many examples as we can. So for example, if you have adds X to Y physical damage, that's always going to be local on a weapon, unless it says spells. There are no global sources like this of damage on weapons. They'll always say either to spells or they'll be local. And attack skill gems always use the local, use the value of your weapon for attacking. And then you can keep upgrading your weapon, and that's how you're scaling your build, obviously, when you are in attack skill. If it says, for example, 30 to 50 cold damage to spell, that is global. So you can get 2 of these ones, and it's not going to be alternating your ones as a attack skill would. And if you have 30 to 50 cold damage to spells, this is obviously not going to affect your attack. So if you're default attacking or whatever, that's not going to get affected by it. Increased critical strike chance on the weapon is local, so that'll make your base crit for an attack, which is kind of complicated. We'll get to that later, but that'll scale that. And spells have their own base crit, and it will try to be very, very specific with like increased spell critical strike chance, which is global. Basically, whenever it's saying something to spells, it's the same as thinking it is global. Stats on armor pieces are local to the armor. So, for example, if you're getting a Val Regalia energy shield chest piece, and that has 30 flat energy shield on it and 50% increased energy shield, this is local to the armor. Whereas on an amulet, you can generally ring and amulet slots are more global unless they are saying specifically 2 spells or 2 attacks. So, for example, if you get 20% increased energy shield on an amulet, that is actually global. So jewelry in general, belts as well. So obviously the aim of getting better gear is to make your character stronger. And the purpose of this is to make your character live longer, so that's why you want life and resist. damage will make you kill things faster, and the faster we kill them, the faster they die. So movement speed is also very important, and in Path of Exile, movement speed is a huge source of defense, because the easier it is for you to dodge and avoid enemy hits, um, it's so much easier to it's just a really good sense of defense. And while it might sound like a joke, at the end of the day, just don't get hit. It is really strong in PoE. Flasks are incredibly strong in Path of Exile. I sometimes do an episode called a Sunday Roast. I will probably try to do one per league, and it's basically where we have people apply that are struggling with their builds. And kind of Gordon Ramsay style, I'll try to insult them, say how stupid they are, while at the same time, while trying to entertain the people who aren't being roasted, I'm also trying to help the person. And the number one thing that people screw up that we end up helping the most with is actually flasks. Flasks are incredibly strong, and you really don't want to ignore it. A lot of the time, some players will be following a build guide either by me or Mathil or another creator, and they'll maybe feel like they have very similar gear, but we're just shredding through the game. And a combination of jewels, which is another piece of gear, jewels and flasks are what like really makes that makes a big difference. And same with gem levels for skills can be very important too. So normally a very normal setup would be a fast setup of you have one life flask, unless you're an energy shield build. You run one life flask, which is preferably instant, so that would want the prefix either bubbling or seething. That's because in Path of Exile, you're very rarely dying to slow over time flask, like, oh no, in 3 seconds I'm going to be dead. It's very more like snap damage, where it's going to be like, oh, and you're using your flask and trying to get back up to full life quickly. So bubbling or seething on a life flask, I don't like panic, and I don't recommend it, which is like instant if you're on low life. It's so easy to go from like 30 or 40% health directly down to 0, and you really want to keep your health bar above at least 1. As long as you're above 1, you're good. Other than that, we have 4 utility flasks, like things like granite, basalt, jade, and we usually always use a quicksilver, but those are very strong. And immunities on your flasks is very important. So immunities in importance is the most important is bleed immunity. There's some very scary bleeds from monsters that can kill you incredibly quickly and you won't have time to react. Number second most important is freeze immunity. Strong boxes can freeze your character. It's like a box of rewards, but they kind of have like a trap, you could say, and they can freeze you sometimes. So it's very strong to be able to bleed and freeze immune, especially for softcore. As long as you have those two, you're generally good. Those are the most two important. After that, once you get the maps, curse immunity is really important, and if you're a hardcore player, shock immunity is very important too. And yeah, there are loads of unique flasks as well that can offer a large power spike in damage or defense. And a rule of thumb for attack builds, you really want to upgrade your weapon periodically, whereas for spell builds, sorry, for spell builds, you can very easily use things you find in Act 1 or 2, and that can actually carry you all the way to Act 10. That's why it's so much easier. So something I very often end up recommending is if you find something, say you're using lightning spells, and you manage to find something to plus level of spell skill gems. The reason that this is so strong is it used to be socketed gems only, and a lot of people think it still is, but if it's +1 level of lightning spell skill gems, it doesn't matter if you have those gems in your chest, in your helmet, or in your boot. You don't need to have them socketed. Whereas, for example, a no longer used item like Life Sprig would still be socketed gems only, which obviously makes it a lot worse because then you're forced into on a 3-link. But to keep a lookout from +1 level of spell skill gems or lightning skill gems, and you can actually buy these from the vendor fairly often in the start. And yeah, depending on where you start, you have things like you have dodge and evasion on the right side. On the left side, you have fist damage reduction, you have block, and a lot of life nodes. A lot more life nodes than the right side does. And at the top, you usually go for block and sometimes energy shield. That means that it's generally a lot easier for a shadow or a witch to go for energy shield and evasion builds or dodge, and in some cases block. Whereas like on the south side of the tree, like duelist, it's a lot harder to do an energy shield build. If we don't count weapon slots, you're gonna need an average of 51 resist per gear piece to cap yourself when you enter maps, because you obviously lose 60% resist by doing the Acta and Kitava total. And we have resist benchcrafts that you unlock through the campaign, and it's very important to use these. You can actually very easily resist cap just by using white items and going to your hideout that is unlocked in Act 2 by doing a small side quest for Helena, and you only have to do this once ever. That is actually not something you have to do per league, but once you have that, you can at level 12 craft resist on your gear for a transmute, and this is incredibly strong. Even if you have like a white leather belt with just crafted resist on it, this is a great way to resist cap early. And on your armor slots, you generally want to make sure that most of your items have life on them. Ideally, a rule of thumb would be, like, especially once you're near the end game, like anywhere from 50 to 70 life and 1 resist and maybe a crafted resist would be a really great item. Sometimes I'll see people using an item with like 12 life, 3.6 life regen, stun and block recovery, and I'm like, probably shouldn't be using this item. And items is one of the most complicated things in Path of Exile. Yeah. And yeah, gloves, helmets, boots, body armor, all of them should ideally have life, 1 resist, and hopefully a crafted resist on top. The boots, ideally you want movement speed. It feels pretty bad running around with boots with 0 movement speed. And especially at the end game, it's become a lot more accessible to get a 6th link now. There's divination cards, and I have a couple of episodes that talk about all the different ways of how to easily get a 6th link. And if you watch the episode, I hope you'll agree that it is easier than it might seem without the information in the video. But once you have a 6th link, you get a very big damage spike. And as far as like overcapping resistances and getting, maybe 100 or 200, the only time that matters is if you're getting cursed. So weapons, generally you want to get damage types for what you're trying to scale your build. So for example, you might be playing Earthquake, and if you're doing a physical damage based build, you would want to get flat physical damage and percentage physical damage. And physical is generally the way to scale builds right now. There isn't that many builds, and I would never really recommend builds that are scaling like, oh, get a bunch of flat lightning, flat cold, and high attack speed. That is currently not in a good space. And you also have like the you can choose with one-handed or two-handed weapons. The big benefit of using a two-handed weapon like an axe or a staff is that you can have 2 different 6th links. So you could maybe, a quick example would be, you could have Earthquake in your chest, and if you're using a two-handed mace that is also 6th link, you could have an ancestral war chief totem in that 6th link. So there are benefits to that. Obviously, if you're using 2 one-handers, you get like an attack speed bonus, etc., and you can scale it differently. But you are missing out on that double 6th link. There is offhand equipment, so obviously some attacks will be like alternating. There's one like dual strike, which will hit with both at the same time, and then you have like offhands like shields or quivers, and they can give both offense and defense. And a rule of thumb for like gear on accessories, it's like defense, amulets and rings and belts and stuff. You can generally do anything like life, resist, like and more damage as well. Flasks is for replenishing your life or mana. On some builds, especially attack-based builds, you can very easily get rid of a mana flask by getting, for example, physical damage leached as mana. Some builds might really struggle to get rid of a mana flask. And as a quick early tip, there's a stat you can roll called Enduring, which makes mana flasks just miles better. It means that when your mana goes full, it no longer stops working. And it works similar to a utility flask. It's incredibly strong. And again, remember to roll for curse, bleed, freeze, and shock immunity when possible. And I normally don't recommend. The best type of flask is Alchemist Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline. However, most players, when they're new, won't be killing monsters enough to replenish an Alchemist Flask, which is basically increased effect, but it lasts less. And the way you replenish flask charges in Path of Exile is by killing monsters. So a Chemist Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline would be very, very good when you're new and you don't want to clear as fast. And it's important to remember, you don't need to go from like your shit leveling gear to endgame gear in one jump. You can go for incremental upgrades. And something I do as a rule of thumb that gets easier the more experience you have. But if I know, or my friend tells me, your boots are fucking trash, bro. What I'll do is I'll specifically make sure I try to pick up every single rare boot I'm finding. But then, let's say that I've realized I have pretty good boots. My boots have 25 movement speed, they have 80 life, they have 2 resists, and a crafted resist. These are pretty good gear. These are pretty good boots. Maybe now I'm not going to bother picking up every single piece of loot. Because obviously, like, your inventory will fill up pretty quickly, and it'll use a lot of your time. Because you do drop, like, such a large amount of things per map now. And that's why we use something called item filters, which especially next season, we're going to have really, really good in-depth item loot filter guides with Neversink, one of the main item filter creators of Path of Exile. And it's basically, it's a way of like removing things showing up for your character so you can completely ignore them easier. And yeah, going for incremental upgrades is one of the best feelings in Path of Exile, and like increasing your character a little bit each day and getting better stuff. So, for example, you might get really, really lucky and find a 6-link rare chest or white chest on your first day. Something that's like really, really good on this, then you can get a something called an essence, which basically guarantees the stat on your chest. So an essence of greed would guarantee life on your chest. So you could use a high tier essence of greed, guarantee the life, and then just craft resist on your chest, and you have a really, really good made use of your 6-link there. If you find a ring with just like some life on it and 1 resist, crafting another resist on the bench makes you have a really good ring. Early on, even finding like 40-50 on it can be pretty hard to find good rings early, but getting 40 or 50 life on your rings early on is pretty good. And boots, if you find boots with movement speed, you can just craft life on the bench. If you find with just high life and maybe some resist, you can craft movement speed. So that's pretty good as well. And yeah, keep looking out for things that you can use your crafting bench on. It's incredibly strong, and it's important to like go to your hideout and take a look at the bench and what the options have. As you progress through the campaign, you're going to be unlocking more and more crafts, and you can actually like scroll down and it'll tell you, let's see, these are veils, but it'll tell you like, here I need to do the labyrinth trial in the Imperial Gardens. Here I need to go to the Zizaran mine. It'll tell you where the crafts are from. And you can get so many incredibly strong things from the crafting bench. So, obviously looting gear is very, very important. And not just for gearing, but for vendoring the gear as well. If you are selling an unidentified blue or a rare item to the vendor, you're going to get transmute shards. If you identify it, you will get alteration and... Sorry. If you identify it, you're going to get alteration and alchemy shards. So, identifying and looting gear just to vendor it is really, really good. You're going to need a large amount of both transmute and alterations. And that's something that's a bit of a struggle early. We don't know how the new league mechanic is going to be early game, but Ritual is a great example of something that was really, really good early on, where you could get 4 or 5 transmutes and 3 and 4 alterations very early. So that's very, very good. Be careful when interacting with a new league mechanic, especially on hardcore, as they are often extremely overtuned and can very quickly kill your character. I will be doing the league mechanics, and a lot of people use me as a testing metric because if I haven't died, it's probably pretty safe because I'll usually push the limits with new league mechanics. There is a endgame map mechanic called Harvest, which is incredibly strong, especially for new players in making gear, because you're basically getting free crafting currency every time you find one. And we're going to have 2 episodes about Harvest. The first one is going to be particularly just talking about all the different mods you can use and how they all work. And the second one is going to be like more advanced crafting methods and what you can still do after the nerf. And it is still incredibly powerful. And Harvest can be really, really good for trying to get specific things on an item, like maybe life, maybe resist. Trading is also incredibly powerful, and trying to learn what you want to buy and find. So make sure you make good use of the trade. We have some episodes of trading before, and there's something you can do called whooping, which is basically, say you're searching for boots with 30 movement speed, 70 life, and a resist. You can set up a whoop, which is basically an auto search. So maybe there's not any listed right now, but you can whoop, which is basically it'll continuously search and give you a whoop alert when that item is for sale. Whoop it. Gear can be pretty expensive at the start of the league. However, sometimes really powerful jewels could be fairly cheap at the league. And if you are playing something that not a lot of people are playing, you can end up getting some really, really good gear for basically bargain deals. That is a fairly basic introduction. And obviously we do have more lessons coming soon. We have, for those wondering what we're doing tomorrow, we're doing mapping 101 and 202, which is going to be talking about like advanced endgame strategies for mapping. And we have other episodes that are more advanced on the YouTube as well, but hopefully this was basic enough. If you have any like basic gear questions, now is the time to ask them. What reworks do they do to essences? So before, essences were basically alchemy orbs, like they could only be used on white items, unless you got shrieking or higher, which is the second highest tier. But now screaming is also used as a chaos orb, which basically means you can reroll them on rare items. Could you do a group play for this league? We haven't decided yet. What is the point of essences in endgame? So essences are actually incredibly strong, especially now with something in the endgame. Haywark Hamlet lets you get like very, very high level essences, but more importantly, they're incredibly strong to like base craft. They have these 4 are like really, really good for endgame gear. They're like 4 special essences, and the way you get them is that you have a remnant of corruption. I usually keep one in my inventory at all times, and then in the endgame, when I find either a dread, scorn, misery, or envy, you use the remnant on the essence before opening it, and it has a chance to turn into any of these. And they've made essence a lot more accessible in Ritual League, basically. Like, I would normally not have this many. It is actually useful to keep. We haven't really covered that many currency types yet. So crafting is probably still very confusing for people. But these are basically a currency that'll it'll always turn the item rare. These can be used on normal items or white items, and it'll turn it rare. Whereas these 2 can be used on existing rare items, and we'll re-roll them. And that's what's changing in this upcoming. That's what's changing in this upcoming expansion, is that the screaming ones can now be used on existing rare items. So what's so good about these is that, you know, especially the greed essence, this will guarantee life on an item. So I could use it here. It can't be used on a blue item, but now it guaranteed that really, really higher life roll, and everything else is rolled randomly. And this is actually still very, very useful in endgame crafting too. Sometimes you really want to guarantee one specific stat, and you can you have some mods that are pretty hard to get in different ways, like Deafening Essence of Loathing on a helmet is 5% reduced mana reserved, or Deafening Essence of Seal is really, really high attack speed on weapons, or 32% movement speed on boots. So there's very much a use for essence at the end game. When you get more advanced in Path of Exile, there's a very, very expensive archetype or type of building builds, which is stat stackers. And these stat stackers basically try to get several thousand of the stats, whereas normally a character would have like anywhere from like 50 to 300 on the different stats. Stat stackers will try to get up to 2,000, and then deafening essence of spite, sorrow, and rage they're all the rage. Um, and they can be very, very hard to get a large amount on in solo self fund, but they'll generally be fairly worthwhile in trade league. And the way those builds work is you try to get as much stats as you can on every every piece of item, and then you try to get a percentage increase of the stat that you're scaling. And normally you would have a weapon. Like one quick example is Hand of Wisdom and Action, which is a claw. I actually don't have the upgraded one. We can upgrade that real quick. So Hand of Wisdom and Action, and you can see here that it's 1 to 10 lightning damage per 10 intelligence. So then if you have 2,000 intelligence, you're getting a crazy amount. So those things are very popular. Very, very popular. So, yeah. Whilst leveling, should I invest currency for links, colors, and sockets on rares, or craft white items with correct links? So generally, especially early, you really don't need particularly good crafted items. The most important things is to keep an eye out for items with the socket links you need. Like casters very early often go for a blue, blue, green wand. Then you'll use, like, for example, your attack spell and onslaught and a damage link like added lightning. So early on, you're definitely looking for, more than anything, socket links and colors. And then an item early on can be very strong with literally just a crafted mod on it, to the point where you don't even... It's important to remember that you don't need an item to be blue or rare to be able to use the crafting bench. So early on, something you'll see people doing, especially people doing racing and trying to speedrun, they will have items that are literally like this. Leagues go on for basically 3 months. We have a price taking episodes that should answer all of your questions, Fakido, but basically try not to search for too many things. Any tips for somebody who struggles with fast uptime? Is mostly just getting into the flow of it and getting practice, but once you're at the endgame with a very, very solid build, you'll basically have 100% uptime. Actually, yeah, I do have one very, very big tip. So normally this like left one here would be Q, and I used to put my movement ability on Q. Now I have Flame Dash always on mouse button 5, and I have Smoke Mine on spacebar. So this is a bit of a racing tactic, but I would do like spacebar and then D to detonate the Smoke Mine, and then you can see how fast it's going when I'm playing like this. So this is how a lot of racers will play with this pace. And when you're playing that fast and killing, you have your flash up most of the time. So spacebar as a movement ability is also incredibly good, and it makes it a lot easier to like spacebar like this basically. So it makes it it was a big change for me. I found it, I didn't really struggle much with it until I started playing energy shield builds where you're using all 5 of your flasks. And then you're basically doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Q was horrible as a movement for this, right? Then you have to take your finger off the 1 button. So spacebar was a big difference there. And again, if you don't like doing smoke mine manually like I do, you can put it on mouse button 1 and it'll auto trigger. Spell damage does not affect minion damage. What does reworked rewards, which comes with ultimatum, mean? That depends on context. They're reworking a few things. How do you gear up beyond getting EHP and cap resist? So EHP is kind of misleading. People say EHP and use it wrong a lot. Like, this isn't 6,875 EHP. Effective HP is like after resists and after mitigation. So this is just raw HP. But that is more of a question for like, we do have like a very, very advanced like how to build defense guide that like covers that in depth. And it's very, very hard. But you usually end up having a combination. Like you can have a little bit of armor is pretty good on every character. Armor helps against like small white monsters that are doing attacks very often. And then you could have, for example, evasion. You could have endurance charges, and there are loads of like defensive abilities. Should I buy a racing game rig so I could use my faster foot pedals? You know, you joke, but foot pedals actually would be fairly beneficial. Is it generally better to have a plus percentage damage type stat or a plus flat to flat damage type on gear? So that actually depends a little bit, and we can answer that question. Let me go to the gem vendor in Act 10, and I'll show you some quick examples. So that depends a little bit on the gem and your cast speed, and we use a program called Path of Building to help this a little bit. But, so let's look at Fireball, and then Stormcold. So, Fireball, if you see the like 6th line here, has effectiveness of added damage 240%. So that means that you make a lot more out of like 1 to 100 fire damage to spells will get that much stronger. It'll be like multiplied with the effectiveness here. Whereas here, lightning skills, they only have 130% of added damage. So yeah, it's a very, very big difference here. So that's like one way. True, Ash. That's true. There's new low life mechanics coming next thing. Sorry for repeating. Doesn't assigning spacebar remove the option to quickly go through vendor dialogue? I mean, you can just hit escape or mouse button 1 anywhere. You don't need spacebar for that. Explain the difference in building for ignite and burning damage, i.e. flame wall, righteous fire. What does burning added fire damage to spells do for the two? So fire damage to spells and hits don't like scale ignite in that way. Like for example, if you get fire damage to spells for righteous fire, that wouldn't do anything. And it would be really, really bad because those builds usually do a more complicated mechanic called elemental equilibrium, which is never procced by a damage over time. So flame wall has no hit component. It is directly just damage over time. So the way you normally do scale these is you would use a lightning skill to lower the fire resistance of your enemies, and then your flame wall will still be doing shit tons of fire damage. And then if you have fire damage to spell somewhere, that'll actually be making the enemies tankier. Doesn't the flat fizz on weapon become global next league? It does not. It does not. Are chaos damage over time skills weak in the endgame? No, but they do require quite a lot of like knowledge about how to scale them. A lot of people do struggle a little bit with scaling essence drain and stuff like that. What is considered an exerted attack? So slam skills like earthquake and thunder can be exerted. And exerted means that it's basically powered up. So if I use a seismic cry, it'll be a number on my slam skill. So earthquake would get the number 3 on it, and then each time you use that attack, it'll go 3, 2, 1, and it'll disappear. Any good resources for crafting recipes? Yes, I have a lot of videos with crafting recipes. I have a lot of videos with crafting guides and stuff on my YouTube. But that's like all we're gonna do for questions for here. And again, we do have a lot of other helping content on YouTube, and generally you can always drop by my Twitch chat and ask questions here. But I hope this helps, and I hope you guys are enjoying Path of Exile University. That was the 2 lessons for today. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. BST, we're going to do Mapping 101, followed directly by Mapping 202, which is going to basically talk about how maps work, how do you sustain a map pool, and loads of tips and tricks for mapping. And I hope you guys are enjoying the university series. And obviously, if you know somebody that's new to Path of Exile, feel free to recommend it to them. And if you do feel like this does benefit your life in any way, obviously subbing on Twitch is a good way to support. And you could buy a t-shirt, PoE University t-shirt, if you so desire. Again, all support is appreciated. And we're never going to paywall these. It's all free. And if you have disposable income, feel free. So, thanks for watching. Sub if you like the content. But the most important thing, try to die less than I do.